So today our subject is Sikhism, and Sikhism is an interesting religion for many reasons, but one of the unique things about it is that it emerges at a time in which there is interaction between Hinduism and a foreign religion from the Middle East. Now, we haven't studied the Middle Eastern religions yet. We're going to do that later on in the semester. But the Middle Eastern religions are very different than the South Asian religions. So our religion today is going to contain some elements that we're not used to because they are of Middle Eastern origin rather than South Asian origins. All right, so this will be a little bit different than Buddhism and Jainism, but it's still very much a part of the South Asian religious family. All right, so let's start off with a quick glance. Sikhism is one of the smaller religions that we're going to study in this course. It's not as small as Jainism, which we talked about last time. There's an estimated 25 million Sikhs in the world today. So that's a pretty good number, and this religion is one of the youngest religions that we'll study in this class. Sikhism, depending on the starting point that you use, is the starting point I would use was the lifetime of the first leader of the movement, the first guru, whose name is Nanak. He lived 500 years ago. So we could say that Sikhism is 500 years old, and in that time, it's grown to 25 million members. Now, Sikhism began in a region of northern India called the Punjab. And the word Punjab means roughly 5 rivers because it's an area where there are 5 tributaries of the Indus River, right? We learned about the Indus River in the beginning of our study of Hinduism. And that's where the majority of Sikhs still live today. However, in modern times, we can find Sikh communities all over the world, including here in the United States. And I'll talk briefly about the Sikh community here in the United States near the end of the lecture today. So you've heard me use this word Sikh, and that's a common English pronunciation of the term. But in the Punjabi language, it's actually pronounced Sikh. So you can use either Sikh or Sikh. It's common for English speakers to say Sikh rather than Sikh. In either case, it means essentially disciple, one who learns. And the Punjabi language, the dominant language of the Punjab state of northern India, is an Indo-Aryan language. It derives from classical Sanskrit, but it's also a language that is influenced by Persian, Arabic, Turkish as well. So in Sikhism, just like in Buddhism and Jainism and Hinduism, we have a belief that time is cyclical. So we call this never-ending cycle of rebirth samsara once again. We've talked a lot about samsara since the beginning of this semester. We also have these familiar terms karma, and the goal here is to try and achieve liberation from samsara. That's moksha. But in the Punjabi language, moksha is referred to as mukti, but it's the same thing, right? Referring to liberation from samsara according to the Sikh path. Now, aside from those elements, we're going to see some new stuff when it comes to Sikhism, stuff that we haven't seen much of before. One thing is that Sikhism is monotheistic. We haven't talked much about monotheism thus far this semester, right? In Hinduism, of course, we have many different gods and goddesses. So in a polytheistic religion. When we talked about indigenous religions, well, those were polytheistic as well. When we got to Buddhism, Buddhism isn't that focused on theism, but you could describe Mahayana Buddhism with its different bodhisattvas as looking very much like a polytheistic religion. Jainism, too, isn't overtly theistic, right? The focus is all on a life committed to asceticism and ahimsa, not really any concern for deities per se. But here we have a religious tradition that is focused on the worship of one supreme transcendent God. That there is one God, and this God transcends all forms, has never incarnated. So unlike the Hindu belief that Vishnu incarnates in various human forms, this one God has never incarnated, and you don't depict this one God either. That's very unusual for a South Asian religion, right? If you think back to Hinduism, of course, we have murtis, right? We have these statues and all these different physical representations of the gods. For example, Shiva was depicted not only in a kind of human form, but also through the lingam, right? That stone pillar. But in the Sikh tradition, you never depict God. God is transcendent. So where did this come from? Well, it's completely possible that they arrived at this understanding of God on their own, but the historical records suggest that these ideas represent a kind of syncretism between Hinduism and a religion arriving from the West, from the Middle East, called Islam. Now, we're going to study Islam later on in the semester. We'll spend 5 lectures on Islam later on. And so Sikhism emerges at a time historically in which Muslims, who are monotheists, who believe that God is transcendent and you never depict God in physical forms, right? And Hindus, who are polytheistic and they depict gods, there's this interaction between these religious communities. And while some people, sort of dig in and are completely hostile to the other, there are other people who seek to kind of reconcile these religious traditions. And we'll see a variety of syncretic religious thinkers operating in the 16th century in northern India. One of those is a man named Nanak. And Nanak is the founder of Sikhism. So here's a map that shows us where the Punjab is located. Here's the entirety of the Punjab. But then, as we learned in our study of Hinduism, in 1947, when the British withdraw from South Asia, they decide to partition India into separate states. We have a Hindu majority state called India, and then we had a Muslim majority state called Pakistan. Right? We learned all about that process. Well, when Pakistan was created, its border went right through the Punjab. And the result was that about 2/3 of the Punjab end up in Pakistan, and the remaining third in India. Well, when the partition occurs, the Sikh community, which is concentrated here, has a decision to make. Do we want to live in the Muslim majority state, or do we want to live in the Hindu majority state? The vast majority of Sikhs decide to live in the Hindu majority state. And so we have this migration into the Indian part of the state. And that's where we find this important city called Amritsar. And I had you find Amritsar on your map assignment at the very beginning of the semester. This is the holiest city in the world for Sikhs. And Sikhs from all over the world will travel to make a pilgrimage here and to visit a number of sacred sites, including the famed Golden Temple. So today, about 60% of the population of the Indian state of Punjab is Sikh. So that's where we find the greatest concentration of Sikhs in the world, but they can be found elsewhere, of course, as well. So let's jump back a few centuries. Let's go back to the 12th century, well before Sikhism existed. This was a time in which there were vast Muslim empires in the Middle East. So Islam begins down here in the region of Arabia called the Hijaz, in the cities of Mecca and Medina. And then it grows in the ensuing centuries. It overtakes the Byzantine Roman Empire, the Persian Sasanian Empire, and various people become Muslim, and new kingdoms are formed. Well, those kingdoms in turn begin to expand further, and we see a Turkic Muslim kingdom then expanding into the Indus River Valley and into northern India, bringing Islam, Muslim merchants, Muslim missionaries and mystics as well. And in time, we'll see the emergence of Muslim political dynasties concentrated in the north. By the time we get to the 16th century, a Muslim ruling elite has emerged and established an empire in South Asia called the Mughal Empire. The Mughal Empire takes shape in the 16th century. So you have then a Muslim empire, but governing over a majority Hindu population, a population that also includes Jains. There's still some Buddhists there, although Indian Buddhism doesn't fare particularly well. Other eclectic religious thinkers. There are Christians there. There are even a small number of Jews there as well. And so people in this pluralistic environment begin to debate and discuss religious ideas. And it's out of that interesting historical exchange of religious ideas that we'll see the emergence of Sikhism in the 16th century. So scholars refer to religious pluralists from this time period that believed that people should transcend, fixed religious identities and come together in devotion to God, to the divine. And that singing devotional hymns, that music, this emotional, creative enterprise, is a unifying force that can bring diverse people together. This tradition of religious pluralists who compose religious hymns and poetry and gather together in praise and in worship of God, of the transcendent, of the ultimate reality, are referred to as the Psalms. Now, this is a time in northern India where the Bhakti movement is really growing. In our study of Hinduism, we learned about this idea of Bhakti, that Hinduism allows for many different paths to liberation. One of those, and the path that is strongly encouraged by the Hindu text known as the Bhagavad Gita, is Bhakti. That is selfless love and devotion to a deity, in hopes that that deity, through divine grace, will then liberate you, will rescue you like a savior from samsara and lead you to moksha, so that your Atman can reunite with Brahman, the ultimate reality. So that approach to Hinduism has really grown to be the preeminent form by this time period. And it works well with the arrival of Islam. Islam is monotheistic, but it too emphasizes that the path to heaven, the path to paradise, is to devote your life to the worship of the one God. And in Islamic mysticism, there's a real emphasis on selfless love and devotion of God, right? Of abandoning worldly concerns and devoting yourself to the one God. So there's an interaction between these traditions. And this approach to the worship of the divine or God and syncretism inevitably occurs, right? People are debating and exchanging ideas. You don't necessarily have some type of religious authority that is saying, here's the rules, don't you dare break them, right? Now, if you meddle in politics, you might have someone, crush a movement because they fear a rival authority. But otherwise, there's a lot of free exchange of ideas going on. So this diverse devotional religious community forms that is egalitarian. It's not concerned with caste restrictions. And of course, we saw that in Buddhism and Jainism there too, they rejected the Hindu caste system, that everyone was equal within the community. Everyone could follow this religious path towards liberation equally. It didn't matter whether you were a Dalit or a Brahmin or a Shudra or whatever it may be. And of course, in Islam, there's no caste system either. So it's egalitarian. It emphasizes the path of devotion, like the Bhakti tradition of Hinduism, and that the one transcendent reality is ultimately transcended, right? That some people from a Hindu tradition may utilize statues of gods, right, to assist them in conceiving of the divine. Whereas the Muslims over here, they don't depict their God, right? There are different approaches that human beings may take. But their view was that the end goal is the same. The end goal is the same for everyone. It doesn't matter whether you come from a Hindu family or a Muslim family or whatever it may be, everyone can follow this path towards the one divine reality. Now, certain members of this egalitarian religious devotional community emerged as what we could describe as gurus, as teachers with their own followings, right? They had their own unique ideas. And they were particularly adept at composing their own devotional hymns, their own devotional poems, which they taught to their students. So one of those popular sant composers, poets, religious thinkers, teachers, was a man named Nanak. And Nanak was born in the late 15th century and dies in 1539. He is the man regarded as the founder of Sikhism. So let's learn about Nanak, or as he's known to his followers, Guru Nanak, right? Teacher. So we're told that Nanak comes from a Hindu family. He's from the merchant caste. And he's someone who's very much interested in different religious ideas, right? And there's so much diversity in 16th century, late 15th century northern India. Now, he had grown up and followed the standard custom. He entered the householder stage. He gets married. He has kids, but he can't get beyond his interest in spiritual religious matters. So he decides, not unlike the Buddha hundreds and hundreds of years before, and not unlike Mahavira, hundreds and hundreds of years before, that he's going to leave his old life behind, his family life, his land, his home, his career, and become a wandering ascetic. India has this long-standing tradition of people becoming wandering ascetics. So he renounces the world, he begins to travel, he meets with different gurus and swamis, yogis, Sufi saints, all these different religious thinkers. He discusses religious ideas. And we're told that at the age of 30, when he's performing ritual ablutions in a river, he submerges in the water and has this religious experience, this encounter with the divine, the one true God, the ineffable reality. And he emerges then from the water having been transformed, understanding that the truth is not to be found within Hinduism or within Islam or any other established organized religion. The truth transcends them all, and it lies in devotion to the one God and in service to humanity. So having these new insights, he then begins to travel further. And according to Sikh legend, he travels really far and wide. I mean, he goes all the way to Arabia. They say he goes to Mecca. There's no historical evidence that he did this, and that would have been a really extraordinary journey, very far and difficult, and to other parts of the world as well. And as he goes, he dresses in a particular way. He wears items of clothing that Hindus would typically wear, while he also wears certain items of clothing that Muslims would typically wear. So he's wearing symbols of both religions, which confuses people. They can't tell whether he's a Hindu or he's a Muslim. And his message is that, well, he's actually neither, right? That he's this bridge between these religious communities. And the true path is not in either of those religions, but it's a new one. It's a new path. And so he's sort of a physical manifestation of the syncretism taking place. Well, he travels, he teaches, and some people choose to be his student, his disciple, his Sikh, to use a Punjabi word, and to take him as their guru. He finally returns home and settles in the Punjab, where he establishes a community. And people come and they learn from Nanak as their personal guru, as their personal leader. And so this whole community develops around devotion to Nanak as a guru, as a spiritual master to guide people along the path. Now, his disciples include people of all caste backgrounds, men and women, people from both Hindu and Muslim backgrounds, Buddhist, Jain, it doesn't matter. They're all welcome in Nanak's community. During the remaining years of his life, in addition to instructing people, he also composes these religious hymns. He teaches that music is the highest form of prayer. It's the greatest form of devotion. In the same way you and I react emotionally to really powerful music, maybe compelling lyrics, he sees that emotional reaction as evidence that music has an ability to move the soul. So this is the highest form of prayer. It's much more effective in his thinking than, simply chanting some words like a mantra or something like that. That music accompanied by drums, for example, is the most powerful form of devotion. So let's look a bit closer at what Nanak teaches his followers, his disciples. He keeps the idea of samsara that you would find in Hinduism and Buddhism and Jainism, that time is cyclical and we're all stuck in samsara and we're being reincarnated again and again and again, and it's karma that dictates the circumstances of our reincarnation. So that's all familiar stuff. That's classic South Asian, Indian religious ideas. The goal is to try and achieve liberation from samsara, to achieve moksha, or as it's referred to in Punjabi as mukti. But like Buddhism and Jainism, but not like Hinduism, he rejected the caste system, rejected the Vedas, rejected the depiction of the divine in statues, what Hindus would call murtis, right? The physical statues that contain the presence of the divine. He rejected that. So he is iconoclastic, like Muslims. Rejected the idea that the divine has human incarnations. Right? So I mentioned before, an example would be the idea that Vishnu takes on human form like Krishna and Rama. And of course, he rejects polytheism. He's a monotheist like the Muslims. And there are some forms of Hinduism that also emphasize monotheism, albeit in a slightly different way. So he's a monotheist. And as I said before, he emphasizes music as the highest path to God, the greatest form of prayer. And he stresses not only devotion, selfless devotion to the one God, but he also stresses that to love God is also to love humanity and to serve others. And that's an important part of the path that he proposes to liberation. So he establishes what come to be known as a langar. A langar is, in essence, like a soup kitchen. It is a place where meals are prepared and distributed for free to anyone who wants to eat. And in Guru Nanak's community, it doesn't matter what caste you belong to. It doesn't matter what religion you affiliate with. You don't have to be a Sikh in order to eat at the langar. So you can have Christians and Muslims and Buddhists and Hindus and Jains all eating together. Now, some people believe that you shouldn't eat with unbelievers, or if you belong to a certain caste, so if you're from the Brahmin caste, you would never eat side by side with a Shudra, for example. But in Nanak's teachings, everyone is equal, right? This is an egalitarian movement. And so everyone eats side by side in this community. Now, although he had embraced asceticism early on in his life, when he came to this new realization, right, when he had this experience of God, he rejected the path of asceticism. He taught that it's completely possible to live a righteous, holy life that can lead to liberation by living within the world. So he had, by the end of his life, reunited with his wife and children, right? Returned to family life. He said, monasticism is not a part of our path. Asceticism is not a part of our path. Of being married, of raising a family, all of these things are good and encouraged. And this is something that we can see in Islam, right? Islam doesn't teach monasticism either, right? You should get married, you should have a family, and it's possible to be righteous in the process. So that becomes an important part of Nanak's teachings. When he reaches the end of his life, he chooses a successor to be the new leader of his community, the next guru. And he selects not his son, but his foremost disciple. And so his foremost disciple becomes the second guru. And that would then begin this chain of gurus that would ultimately reach 10 human gurus before an interesting twist occurs to lead this new religious community in northern India. So what is distinct about the Sikh path to moksha, to liberation from samsara? Right? We've already seen multiple different paths. We learned about the diverse paths that Hinduism proposes and how it results in the liberation of your Atman to reunite with Brahman. We saw how the Buddha taught that there is no Atman. Instead, it's all about the skandhas, and you need to extinguish the skandhas, right? And they prefer to use the term nirvana, which means to blow out, right? To extinguish, to cool off. Then the Jains basically return to the idea of the Atman, but they talk about the jiva, this eternal life force that exists within us that's trapped in ajiva, this lifeless material, and you need to basically chip away at it through extreme asceticism in order to liberate your jiva so that it can escape samsara. Well, Nanak is a monotheist, and so he puts the one God at the center of all things. And in fact, he talks about how the one God is the one who puts samsara in motion. That's an interesting twist. Previously, samsara had no beginning. It has always been and always will be. But here's an attempt at reconciling a cyclical conception of time with the linear conception of time that we'll find in the Middle Eastern religions like Christianity and Islam. So here, the one God he creates the universe, gets things rolling, and then we human beings, as part of his creation, find ourselves stuck in samsara. And it's only through his divine grace that we can be liberated from samsara. Now, what did Nanak call his one God? Well, it's very interesting. He would use different words depending on who his audience was. So when he spoke to Hindus in India, it wouldn't be unusual for him to start talking about Brahman, right? Brahman is the ultimate reality, the ineffable reality that lies beyond samsara, according to Hindu teachings. When Nanak spoke to Muslims, he would refer using the Arabic word for God, Allah, right? The one God of Islam, Allah. And then speaking to his own followers, he often used this word, Waheguru, Waheguru, which means the wondrous guru, the supreme teacher, right? He is an earthly guru, and then above him is God, and God is the Waheguru, the supreme guru, the wondrous guru. He did use some other terms as well, like Satnam, which means truth, right? The true one or the true name. And his path was very similar to the path of Bhakti, right? That you achieve liberation by devoting yourself to Waheguru. And through Waheguru's divine grace, he will liberate his devoted servants, his most righteous servants, from samsara. If you do not live an adequately righteous life, well, you're going to be reincarnated again. And you need to work towards the spiritual path. But if you live a pious life as a good Sikh, whether you're male or female, you can achieve liberation here and now through devotion to Waheguru, right? We've seen some religions from South Asia where you had to be a man, right? Like the Digambara sect of Jainism had to be a man. Theravada Buddhism had to be a man. Here, in this egalitarian community, you can be a male, female, doesn't matter what your caste is, anything like that. You too can follow this path and achieve liberation through the divine grace of the Guru. When you die then, your soul is liberated and reunited with God, merged into God's oneness. So that's an idea that's reminiscent of Atman reuniting with Brahman in Hinduism, or even in Mahayana Buddhism, the idea of the Buddha nature releasing and reuniting with the Dharmakaya, the cosmic Buddha, the transcendent reality. Or in Islam, later on we'll learn about Islamic mysticism, where they talk about annihilation of the self in God's oneness as well. So there's echoes of other religious traditions in his ideas. Here we can see an image depicting all 10 of the human gurus of the Sikh community. This is the first, so this is Nanak. And then we have his successors, and the other figure who's prominent here, this is the 10th and final human guru. This is Guru Gobind Singh, the founder of the Khalsa, a special military Sikh religious order. You'll notice that all the men here have beards except one, and that's because this guru inherited the leadership of the community at a very young age, so he was just a boy, and he died shortly thereafter. So he never grew to adulthood where he could actually physically grow a beard, but otherwise he would have grown a beard like the other gurus. So let's just talk briefly about the gurus that come after Nanak. Nanak is the founder. He's succeeded by a line of other gurus that lead the community in the Punjab. Just like Nanak, these gurus also compose hymns, songs of praise and devotion to Waheguru, to God, to the one transcendent God, and begin to organize this growing community. And in time, as this community grows in the Punjab, and all the members are devoted to their guru, this begins to look more and more like a political entity. That the guru starts to look more and more like a king, right? Because he has such mastery and control over this growing number of people who have families and are living in villages and so forth. And that begins to get the attention of the Mughal emperors, right? Emperors crush any potential threat to their power, to their kingdom, to their domain. So some of the achievements of the successive gurus, the third guru introduces a number of reforms with regards to women. Despite the fact that Nanak taught this egalitarianism, people joining this community are still shaped by the cultures that they're coming from. And in Hinduism, there were certain restrictions on women, for example, that a widow cannot get remarried in the Hindu tradition. She either goes and lives in a convent, or a practice that has been illegal for over 100 years and was already sort of a rare extreme practice was that of sati, where a woman would throw herself onto the funeral pyre of her husband. Those types of traditions were officially abolished by the third guru, right? In the spirit of egalitarianism, of equality of men and women. When we get to the fifth guru, we have a very important addition to the community, and that is the construction of what's known in English, at least, as the Golden Temple in the city of Amritsar. So the Golden Temple becomes the holiest site on earth for the Sikh community, and it remains so today. It is the center of the Sikh community, and it is the place where the earliest text of sacred Sikh writings would be installed, also by the fifth Guru. So the fifth Guru takes these hymns that were composed by Nanak, such as the Japji, which I had you read for today, at least a portion of it, it's quite long, as well as his other successors, puts them together in a book. So we have then for the first time a Sikh holy text, the original of which is housed in this golden temple at Amritsar. This text is called the Adi Granth, which literally means the first book. Now, after this book is initially compiled, subsequent gurus will add to it further, and it'll take on a new name under the leadership of the 10th Guru, which I'll tell you about more in a moment. But it was during the reign of Guru Arjan, who establishes the temple at Amritsar, who establishes this holy text, who is presiding over this growing, thriving religious community, that the Mughal emperors perceived the Sikhs as a threat. And so seeing the Guru as a particular, not only a potential political rival, but also someone who is teaching a religion which is neither Islam nor Hinduism, he seems to be a heretic. He presses Arjan to convert to Islam, the religion of the ruling dynasty. He refuses, and subsequently Arjan is executed by the Mughal emperors. So he becomes a martyr, right? He's a martyr for the faith. And after that, his successor teaches that it is necessary for the Sikhs to train as warriors in order to protect and defend their community as well as the oppressed everywhere. So after the fifth Guru, we see the development of this martial tradition within Sikhism, which will come to full fruition under the 10th Guru, Gobind Singh. Here's a photograph of the Golden Temple today, which you can go and see in Punjab. And it's surrounded by a vast bathing pool, which is periodically emptied. And here's the interior. And this is where what's called the Guru Granth Sahib is kept, which is the extension of the Adi Granth, the holy text of the Sikhs. When you enter a sacred site like this, or any Gurdwara, any Sikh temple, you wash your feet and cleanse yourself before entering, to enter a state of purity. This is adjacent to the Golden Temple in Amritsar. This is where the Sikh leadership meets today. So you have a council of community elders who will issue decrees. So if there is a pressing issue facing the Sikh community, you need some system of governance to issue a judgment or ruling about something. And so the council of Sikhs who meet here in Amritsar will issue these orders called the Gurmata, by which they express their opinion. Now, does that mean that every Sikh, willingly obeys that opinion? No, it doesn't. And, human beings will do what they want. But this is the source of guidance. If you think about the four domains of religion, this represents the institution, the system of governance in the Sikh tradition, in the absence of a human guru. So what happened to the human gurus? Why did it stop at 10? The 10th Guru, human Guru, was Guru Gobind Singh. And that's him here. Guru Gobind Singh always stands out in images that you see of the Gurus because he wears a bow and arrows, because he is the founder of this military order within Sikhism called the Khalsa. The word Khalsa means the pure. So in the face of ongoing tensions, hostility, and conflict with the Mughal emperors, with the powers that be in northern India at that time, Guru Gobind Singh fully develops a Sikh military order to protect the community, defend it against the Mughals or any other outside threat, and more broadly to come to the need of the oppressed. In order to join the Khalsa, which is not required, but is something that is the highest form of devotion, right? So the Khalsa form a kind of elite within the Sikh community. One goes through an initiation ceremony, a kind of baptism. So a member of the Khalsa is also called Amrit Dari, which means nectar bearing. A sword is dipped in this sort of sugar water, and then the inductee is anointed by this nectar, right, which is this water, and thus they become Amrit Dari. As a member of the community, they have to live according to certain rules that other Sikhs don't have to. So they all follow what's called the 5 Ks. These are physical symbols of their commitment to the ideals of the Khalsa, and also demonstrate their readiness to serve and defend the community at all costs. So the 5 Ks consist of these. The first is called Kesh, which refers to uncut hair. So if you're a man who's joined the Khalsa, you can no longer cut your hair. And that means then that your hair will get quite long. And when men join the Khalsa, they take on an additional name, which is Singh. And Singh means lion. So perhaps there is a connection there between growing one's hair out and the idea of a fierce and brave and powerful lion. Because the hair is so long, that adds a new dimension to the utility of a turban. And we'll talk more about the turban in the Sikh tradition as well, because it helps you to keep your hair in place, right? If you're a warrior and you're going into battle, having very long hair, that could cause a problem. So you wear your hair back, wrapped in a turban, and you keep your hair in place with the 2nd K, which is the Kanga. This is a wooden comb. So you wrap your hair up and then you put the comb to keep it in place, and then that's covered with the dastar, the turban or the patka. And then you also have a garment called the kachera, which is in essence like a pair of shorts. And the purpose of the kachera is that this not only represents your commitment to the ideals of the Khalsa, but also your readiness at all times, right? That you're ready to go. Then you have the kirpan. The kirpan is a sword, because you're a warrior, so you have to be ready to fight. Now, in modern times, the kirpan has become basically like a small dagger. And, so like an American Sikh who is a Amrit Dari member of the Khalsa may have little more than something, that's like 6 inches long and almost looks like an ornate like letter opener, right? Not exactly a weapon of war per se, right? But historically, it would have been an actual sword used in combat. And then lastly, we have the kara, which is a steel bracelet worn around the wrist, meant to represent strength, being firm and strong against all opposition. So those are the 5 Ks that represent the Khalsa, this special order of Sikh warriors. Now, women can also be initiated into the Khalsa. And when a woman is initiated, instead of taking the name Singh, they receive the name Kaur, which means princess. And all members of the Khalsa need to abstain from any intoxicants. So no alcohol, no drugs, not even tobacco, in order to be ready at all times, right? You never know when you'll be summoned to defend the community against an outside threat. And so you don't want to be in a situation where you're intoxicated and unprepared to act in defense of the community. Here we see some charts showing you the 5 Ks. And so in this one, which is an actual photograph, there you can see a modern kirpan, right? It's just a very small dagger. Here, it's a bit more significant. There's the bracelet. These are the shorts I was telling you about that symbolize readiness. We have the long hair kept in place with the kanga, or the comb, and also letting your hair grow also involves letting the beard grow as well. So there's a difference within the Sikh community between Khalsa members and non-Khalsa members. Sikhs who are devout believers but aren't part of the Khalsa might shave their face, or they might cut their beard. You might see a Sikh wearing his dastar, but his beard is nicely trimmed. And he wouldn't have the other items like the kirpan or the steel bracelet either. So he's a Sikh, but he's not a member of the Khalsa. The Khalsa represents sort of this elite minority within the broader Sikh community. So the 10th human guru, Guru Gobind Singh, creates the Khalsa, right? This special elite warrior order. He also, at the end of his life, announces that there will be no more human gurus. So he will be the 10th and last human guru. Who's the next guru? He instructs his followers, his disciples, that the holy book, the Adi Granth, but a version that has had subsequent hymns added to it, becomes the new Guru. So the Adi Granth becomes the Guru Granth Sahib. So the text, the holy book of Sikhism, is treated as the living Guru, still to this day. From the time of Guru Gobind Singh's death in the early 18th century until the present, it is the text, that compilation of devotional hymns composed by the gurus as well as members of the broader Sant movement. So there's actually writings by people who identified as Hindus and people who identified as Muslims within the Adi Granth. That text is the Guru. And obviously a book can't speak for itself, and that's why we have that council of elders in Amritsar who issues decrees, right? Because technically the Guru is a book. Right? They can't speak for itself. People have to interpret it. So this is the most sacred text for the Sikhs, and the devotional hymns from the Guru Granth Sahib are regularly performed by musicians, and those musicians typically are from the Sikh community, but there are also periodically musicians from Hindu and Muslim communities who may perform the sacred hymns of the Guru Granth Sahib as well. And this sacred music is called kirtan. And kirtan is one of the most important devotional practices of the Sikh tradition. I mentioned before that Nanak stressed the importance of music as a means to express devotion to God. And so that is reflected in the Sikh practice of kirtan as well. One of the most important prayers or sections of this text is what I had you read for today. I had you read a sample of the Japji Sahib. This is a section of the Guru Granth Sahib that was composed by the first Guru, the founder, Guru Nanak. And in the Japji, he expresses his idea of God, that God is one, that God is beyond births and deaths, right? The cycle of reincarnation, and the path to liberation is to worship that one God, Wahe Guru. So the text itself is installed not only in the Golden Temple in Amritsar, but in gurdwaras or Sikh temples all over the world, copies of the text. And the text is treated like a living person. So people will bow before in the way that you would bow before a living human guru. People cover it and put it to bed at night. People will fan it, right? And it sits on a kind of throne with a canopy like a royal dignitary in the presence of his audience. Here's just a short excerpt from the Japji, which you read today. This expression that there's one God, that he's the creator, and that he is beyond births and deaths. So we have sort of this monotheism of Islam and of the Middle Eastern religions with this reference to samsara coming from the South Asian religious traditions as well. And there we see another depiction of Guru Nanak, right? Instead of showing God, what you see in Sikh iconography are the gurus, right? So this is Guru Nanak. You might also see Guru Gobind Singh, another guru, but you never see Wahe Guru. You never see God in the Sikh tradition. I want to share with you a video clip that talks about this sacred text. Is at the core of Sikhism. And actually, I'm going to skip over this video clip just because of we're about to run out of time. So let me skip over that and mention briefly some notes about Sikh practices. Sikhs engage in daily prayers at specific intervals in the day. There is no special day of the week where Sikhs are obligated to go and visit a gurdwara or Sikh temple. Instead, you go when you need to. With regards to Sikhs in a country like the United States, they've adopted the custom of going to gurdwaras on Sundays. That's not because it's a part of the Sikh tradition, but just because, Christians are going to church on Sundays. So that's like a day of the week that is perfect for Sikh community members to go to their house of worship as well and to pray. When they go to the temple, they will listen to kirtan, the singing of sacred hymns from the Guru Granth Sahib. They will also partake in what's called prasad. Prasad is this sacred food made from flour and sugar and butter. And it's initially an offering to God, but then as the service concludes, the bits of prasad are given to everyone who has come to the temple. And so everyone partakes of the prasad, which is a symbol of the equality of all people. It doesn't matter what caste background you have or what your economic status is, everyone partakes of this food equally and the same. So it is both a symbol of God's grace, but it is also a symbol, a statement of the equality of all people in this community. Another important practice is the langar. So the langar, as I said before, in reference to Guru Nanak, is a soup kitchen. And as part of their service to other human beings, Sikh temples will operate a langar in which they cook food and they distribute this food for free to anyone who comes, whether you're Sikh or not. And everyone will sit down and eat side by side, regardless of caste distinction or religious affiliation. And here you can see a member of the community distributing chapatis or flatbread. And here are the diners. They've gathered together. Everyone is covering their heads out of respect for being in the temple, and they're eating their food. The food is typically vegetarian in order to allow as many people to partake in the same meal, right? Because some people may eat meat, but others don't. So just make it all vegetarian so everyone can partake in the same meal together. Here we see some Sikh musicians performing kirtan, the sacred hymns from the Guru Granth Sahib, the sacred text of Hinduism. And you can see that they have drums and some harmoniums. And the music is very much in line with South Asian traditional music. Thus, it sounds similar to musical traditions that you would find in Hinduism and in South Asian Islam as well. Sikhs are known for wearing a turban. A turban is called a dastar. The turban was worn by Nanak and all subsequent gurus, and it's considered obligatory for all men, not for women. Women will wear a scarf to cover their heads. But men are expected, whether you're a member of the Khalsa or not, every man wears a turban at all times except when he's bathing or sleeping. Other than that, you wear a turban at all times. So turbans, especially when they were made of fine fabric, were worn by dignitaries, by noblemen, by rulers. And as such, a guru, a person possessing authority, would also wear a turban. But Nanak's message was one of equality. And so everyone wore the dastar. Everyone wore the turban because they're all equal. It doesn't matter whether this one is an untouchable and this one is a Brahmin. Everyone wears the turban. So it becomes this tangible symbol of devotion to the gurus, but also a reaffirmation of the equality of all members. Now, there is a sect that developed in the 1970s called 3HO, that derives out of Sikhism, but it blends some other religious ideas as well. And in that sect, women will wear a turban as well. But traditionally, it's only the men who wear the dastar or the turban. Sometimes, as an alternative to this style of turban, here you can see a U.S. military officer who is a Sikh, and he had to get special permission to wear a turban with his uniform, right? Because there are very specific rules about what you can wear with your military uniform. But on the basis of freedom of religion, he was granted special permission to wear a special military-issued dastar with his U.S. military uniform. This is a common alternative to the turban. This is called a patka. And the patka is much easier to wear because if a turban unravels, it takes 5 minutes or so to put that together. But a patka is just something you can pull over. So kids will wear the patka or athletes. So here we see a Sikh basketball player. Obviously, a turban could fall off pretty easily in the midst of the competition. So he's wearing a patka as a way of covering his head. That's a little more practical. But the idea behind the patka is the same as wearing the dastar. All right, I can see that I am out of time here. There's a few more slides here. This is about the Sikh community in the United States. The former governor of South Carolina, Nikki Haley, she converted to Christianity, but she's actually from a Sikh family. So this is her father wearing his dastar. He's not a Khalsa, thus he's trimmed his beard, and there's her brother. This is the wedding of her brother. So she actually comes from the Sikh American community, even though, as I said before, she has left that tradition and converted to Christianity since. All right, that is all for today. So I will see you back here next week. The exam is online for everyone, and I'll send out a reminder tomorrow night. Thanks very much.